Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our Accept Connect chats. This is just an opportunity for us to hone in on some particular topics and help students answer and navigate the college admission process. We are really excited about our panelists today. So I'm going to kick things off very quickly so we can dive into it to our moderator, Lenny.
Great. Thank you, Brandy, and thank you, Accept for and Strive Scan for hosting this. So today we're talking about how to support LGBTQ, what to do as an LGBTQ identified student in the college application process. We've got some cool adults here to talk about their experiences and to shed some light on things that students and adults who might be watching this in the future want to think about. So I'm going to introduce the panelists very briefly. We have four amazing, amazing educators. First, we have Justin Childs, who is an admissions counselor and recruiter from Florida International University and has a long background in recruitment, in diversity recruitment, in student support, residence life, and career advising. So we're super excited. And Justin's pronouns are he, him. We have Alicia Oglesby from Bishop McNair High School. Hey, Catholic school, college counselor and author and school counseling thought leader with a long experience in helping LGBTQ students navigate the process, especially within the religious school environment, but not only limited to that. We have Adam Sapp. And Alicia's pronouns are she, her, hers. We have Adam Sapp, pronouns he, him, his, who is the Assistant Vice President and Director of Admissions of Pomona College, of the Claremont College fame. And one of the fun things about Adam is his commitment to LGBTQ students and all students, and that he gets to do international travel and was a rural kid himself. So that's right. Something fun I learned from the internet. And finally, have Stacy Kunitz, whose pronouns are she, hers, from Philly, from the Creffield School, and in her own consulting group as Blue Moon Educational Consulting. And Stacy has visited many hundreds of colleges. So she has the real life experience. If you can't visit colleges now because COVID, Stacy has been there. And that is a real exciting benefit to all of us and to the students. So I'm going to start it off with a question for our panelists. So in these COVID times, we're moving towards a lot of virtual visits, right? And then when we move out of these times, ideally we'll be doing in-person visits again. How are LGBTQ students supposed to know? As one LGBTQ student I know once asked, where are all the queers at? In other words, what should students be asking when they're researching LGBTQ-friendly campuses? And I'm going to send this question over first to Adam and Justin to hear their perspectives.
Yeah, Justin, why don't you go ahead and start?
Yeah, most definitely. What should these students be looking for when it comes to certain institutions that they're interested in, right? I think kind of some of the first things is, what are your values, right? What are the things that you are most interested in from a university perspective, right? Do you want kind of some of the general things, right? Do you want to be at a large school, small school, a public school, private school, those things. But then when it comes to your identity, right? Is this institution going to be able to support me, right? And so I know for me, I was a first generation college student on top of being a closeted LGBT, student as well too, right? And so some of the things were, my institution didn't have a pride center, and I would definitely consider that be something that our students today should consider, right? Does the university have a pride center? What is the social climate like for those students, right? And of course, now with COVID-19, is there a space for those students to gather, right? It's going to be virtual. Do you have opportunities to gather in a way that's going to be meaningful for you, right? And these are the questions that you should be asking certain colleges, universities, technical programs, all these different things that you may be interested in. Something else, are there student organizations for you? Is there safe zone training for you or the faculty and staff, so they can be able to help be an advocate or ally for you and your identity, right? I know at FIU, one of the biggest things they do for the LGBTQ community is the Miami Beach Pride. And so all the faculty and staff and students are able to participate that. And that is something that our students love to do. So is that social aspect to, your identity. But outside of that, who can you go, how can you identify somebody at the school if you aren't out, right? Is there a champion? Is that like an underground railroad in the sense, right, of individuals that you can go and talk to that won't, disclose the information about you that you may not be able to get out to individuals at this time, right? And so I have made a list myself, so make sure I'm looking at it.
Yeah, I can jump in there while you're looking at that. I mean, I think, and let me just share my screen here, because I think one of the things, put together just a few slides, I think one of the things that for me is really important. Can everybody see that there? I won't play it, but you can see, I really think you have to start with official channels. I think one of the things that's important is admissions offices have moved online. So many of them have moved virtual. And so you're going to find tours and information sessions, opportunities to connect through these official channels. I think you really should start there. There are questions. Do you sign up and let people know that you want to engage? Or do you just kind of hover and be stealth? You don't actually join a mailing list. I am someone who likes to think you should join a mailing list, but if you don't want to do that, I don't think colleges care one way or another. They just want you to be able to access the information. I think you have systems in your school that you can use, and you should use those to your advantage. Your counselor or counseling team or counseling website. Perhaps there is an organization that you might work with in your community, or maybe at your church, or maybe inside of an organization, a community access or college access organization. Use that resource if you can. I think social media is fine, but my advice, get friendly with email. Colleges love to email. Doesn't mean you have to open every single one. Definitely doesn't mean you have to read every single one. But email is a really standard means of communication for colleges. I know it may sound like 2001 to students today, but the reality is email is still key. And, then I think you move to informal sources. What do students who graduated a few years before you, who happen to be at a college or university, what do they say about that institution? Do you have cousins or family members, aunts, uncles, who may be able to talk to you a little bit about what that experience was like? I think that's also important. And then I have to put in a plug for financial aid. Everybody knows that one of the things that's important is that we think about the balance between access, equity, and support. And one of the ways in which many colleges and universities will support students is through financial aid. Get familiar with those particular calculators. The final thing before I pass it back here, I do want to talk about this because I think this is important, particularly for LGBTQ students. And I did not think about this because I was in the closet when I was in college, but I talk to students every day at Pomona who think about this issue, and that is balancing fit with inclusion. There's academic fit. Is the school a great place for the major you want to pursue, for the academics you want to pursue? There's social fit. Are you going to have friends there? Are you going to know people, feel like you can really engage in different communities? There's financial fit. We all know the reality of affordability. Can I afford this school? That's an important question. Geographic fit. Some of you might want to go as far away from home as possible for college. And I get that because I definitely felt that way, even though I didn't, which is a whole different story. But some of you may need to stay close to home for personal reasons or family reasons. So geographic fit is important. I add two more for LGBTQ students. And I think of this when I give advice to folks within the family and the LGBTQ family: growth fit. What institution is going to allow you to grow personally, academically, into that young adult that you know you want to be? And finally, inclusion fit. How inclusive is the space that you're going? Are there all of the things that you need in order to feel included in the community, in order to feel honored in terms of your identity and honestly, just to be you. And I think that's a really important piece for students in the LGBTQ community to really think about when they're searching for an institution. So let me,
Thanks, Adam.
thank you.
Justin, was there any, were there any other questions or things you wanted to touch on that maybe were different from what Adam said, or any?
No, I think Adam summed it up when he talked about the different layers of fit, right? And I think that's most important for prospective students, college students to consider. I mean, actually kind of think hard about, because even from university policies, if you're thinking about being employed on campus, when it comes to state government policies and stuff around LGBT sexual orientation, you want to make sure that the area that you're in is going to support who you are currently or who you want to become down the line. And so I'm kind of think outside of just on campus fit, but in that local community, and then of course where you want to grow globally moving forward. I think fit in all those different layers is probably the best to sum it up.
I love that focus on both finding a fit for who you are today and who you want to become.
Yes.
Right? No.
Totally.
With that, I'm going to toss it over to Alicia and Susan. I have a question. Should students come out in their essay? And what if you don't want your parents to know? Like, what if you're, can you tell your counselor you're a queer kid without your counselor telling your parents? Can you come out in your essay without them calling your family? How do you handle that? And that's for Alicia and for Susan.
Yes, so I can start. I think, so as a college counselor, a high school counselor, working with students who are in the LGBT community, who identify as queer, it is a conversation that is incredibly important to their college process, right? So students are, especially juniors, 11th graders right now, are thinking about their college application packet and what is going to be included in that packet. Part of that conversation really is sort of displaying who you are as a person to these colleges and universities throughout the country, throughout the world. And so, when students are thinking about those Common App questions, those coalition questions, those essay prompts, they're really naturally going to want to express themselves and express who they are at whatever stage they're in, right? So I think that it is a wonderful conversation. I love having those conversations with my students and helping them figure that out. And I also know as a counselor and as, for lack of a better word, an ally, that it's also a safety issue for our students, right? And so there are students, particularly in my community at Bishop McNamara, who are not comfortable sharing that kind of information with their family or sharing that kind of information with their teachers to sort of pull together all of these pieces of their application. And so I think that if students feel safe talking to their counselor about this, talking to an advisor that they might be working with through a community-based organization, and really figuring out all the parts of it that they want to explore, that they want to communicate through their college application. I think having that conversation is really important. I think that in terms of discussing any parts of our identity, especially the sexual orientation and identity in the essay, I think can be amazing and wonderful and beautiful and a really empowering opportunity and moment for students. But I also recognize that it can be incredibly scary and difficult and tumultuous, depending on the students' relationship with their families and their relationship with all of this. And so ultimately, I think that safety needs to be considered first, right? So I've worked with students who have been threatened to be put out of the house for all of these things. And it's a very real, concern. It's a very real fear. We know that, many students who belong to the LGBT community face homelessness, for these very reasons, right? And so that is a huge part of the process. And so I want students to be able to have someone to go to work through that, to see what that means for them. And then for the students who are in a privileged position to be safe, to have their life situation unaltered for all of these reasons, then exploring what that's going to look like in the essay. What sort of function does the essay serve in order to help the student tell the story about themselves? What exactly are they going to share in their essay to really communicate who they are, and what that means for them as a college student for the next couple of years. So those are my thoughts in terms of the essay, and how students might want to begin thinking about that and start talking about that. But definitely, if they have a counselor to work with, a trusted counselor who gets this and understands this and respects this, and is aware of all of these concerns, to work with that person through the essay process and through the application process.
Thank you for bringing up that moment about safety, Alicia, because I think we can't talk about LGBTQ students without talking about the need to prioritize safety. And that doesn't mean you're not brave. It just means you're thinking about the circumstances. And sometimes a counselor can help you think through those things, and the role of a great college counselor. I have a question in terms of, do we still have, yeah, Stacey. So Stacey, so Alicia's talking about safety. Let's talk about style. Like,
absolutely, yeah.
I'm trans. There. How
Right,
do you style questions? Because I always say, I've been a counselor for 13 years, right? Don't write about what you go through. Write about what you grow through. So
absolutely.
How if these kids don't have a great counselor like you and Alicia, right? How do they what they've grown through?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, and something that I think about a lot. I like to start the Common App prompt that I think most of the kids that I know who have come out in their essays have used is the first prompt, and I know that's going to be the same for next year, which is some students have a background, identity, interest, or talent that's so meaningful they believe their application would be incomplete without it. If that sounds like you, then please share your story. There are other Common App prompts that I think also can lend themselves well to coming out in your essay. But in the end, it's not really about what story you choose to tell. And I do encourage kids to tell a story in their application essay, to think about a moment that is really important for them. That moment could be very small or very large, but it's not so much about the story as about why you're telling that story, right? Think about why that story is important to you, what it means for you, because in the end, what we want is we want your character and we want your values to come through in the essay. When a person finishes reading the essay, they should be able to say, wow, that student is resilient or compassionate or whatever it is that you have shown through your essay. And so coming out can be absolutely a big part of that, but it doesn't have to be as well. And so there are kids who have asked me, like, do I have to come out? And I'm like, no, they're like, I mean, I'm comfortable doing it, but I just have a different story I really want to tell. And I'm like, that's okay too, right? So again, it's not so much about your story, which story you're telling is about why you're telling it. But the other thing that I just want to bring up in terms of safety, because I want to get back to that for 1 second, is that on Common App, there is a space for you to put your preferred name. And that can be an amazing place for kids to, like, if you are using a name that is not the name that was given to you at birth, great, and you can go for it and put your name there. And it can be incredibly affirming because you will likely start to get mail and emails that are addressing you with your preferred name, which is really great. But you need to make sure that that's okay in your family, right? Because it could be that an envelope arrives at the doorstep with your new name on it. And if you're not out to your family, you want to really make sure that that's something you think about before you use that preferred name place. You can always reach out to an individual admissions counselor at any given school and say, listen, this is the name I really would like for you to use, but I can't have that on documents that are public. And usually, well, I'll tell you this, if the counselor is not receptive, maybe that's not a place you want to be, right? And if they're really receptive, that's going to be a good sign for you. So I think it's worth trying to have those conversations. And then the only other thing I wanted to add was that we talked about, your parents seeing your essay, or your counselor or your teachers, are you out to all of them? Your Common App account, or whatever account you're using, as long as you're not giving that password to anybody, nobody is seeing that besides you and the people on the other end. And so I have had students who have written one kind of fake essay that they've showed their parents, and then they've put their other essay that is their coming out essay into Common App, and that is okay. But find someone, some trusted adult, someone who can read your essay for you, even if it's just a good friend, but someone should read your essay besides you, just to check for mistakes and to check for tone and to check for that thing of, am I getting across what I want to get across?
Yeah, absolutely. Phone a friend. Justin and Adam, speaking of how colleges handle using preferred pronouns, I don't even like the term preferred pronouns, using a student's pronouns that might be different than a family might know, or using a name that might be different than a family know. How do y'all's institutions handle that? What are the policies in place? What's still a little fuzzy? What are you working on to support particularly trans and gender nonconforming students who may be using different names or different pronouns?
Yeah, I'll start. I know at FIU, at least for the admissions process, it is relatively straightforward in being that it is your birth name. So whatever is on your transcripts, your SAT, ACT test scores, your birth certificate, social security card, is what you're going to input on the actual application. But once you get to FIU, we do have a preferred name policy where students can switch their name and be able to utilize that. And so we're working towards, total inclusion in regards to that process. But on the front end, especially when you talk about safety, wanting to protect those students, even though they may, go by another name at the time of application, but once they get to FIU, we do have a policy that's in place that students can use their preferred name.
Yeah, so at Pomona, we use preferred name, but the preferred name isn't necessarily sort of private. So the example of, and I really, appreciate I do think, and Stacy's right, that if you want to call the office and talk this through, what you might ask is, what's your policy, not can you do X, Y, or Z? Because sometimes we might want to do it, but the policy around either data integrity or the way in which we pull together files might prevent us from doing it. So too many students with too many different names often leads to many incomplete applications. And the last thing you want is an incomplete app. So the piece that I would say, just to remind you, is if you enter preferred name, most places will address you by that preferred name. And that will be the salutation that will get put into the mail merge. So, especially large institutions, they only have so many ways that they can kind of manage the data. So if it's an option, oftentimes it's a default and you can enter it and you should expect to receive it. But the private versus public option usually isn't a thing. Once it's in the data field, it tends to stay in the data field.
I'll just add that I know that there's a really wide variety of policies around how to handle students who are trans and gender nonconforming names and pronouns. Some schools will go as far as, I know SUNY Oneonta goes as far as, having students self-identify in terms of gender, then reaching out to them, figuring out how they want to communicate.
Yes.
And will essentially code switch, right? The college will find a way. And that's because there are dedicated adults in the space and young people advocating for there to be changes in the policy. So I think that point, though, Adam, about having students ask, what's your policy around? I love that phrase. Like, what's your policy around X, right? And if they don't have one, it's going to be a little smushy and you'll need to figure that out.
Yeah, and just a quick follow-up. I say it that way because policy links to culture. So we have two trans athletes at Pomona who play at Pomona Pitzer, and I distinctly remember reading their applications. They had, at that time, one of them had a they pronoun. At that time, one of them was born male but transitioning female, used female pronouns. Even in committee, we referred to her, right? Even in committee, when discussing the application, we referred to they. So you don't even realize it, but from the moment that you are putting that in the preferred name and you're putting the pronouns in the preferred pronoun box, we are respecting you from the moment that you submit that app all the way through the moment that you're told you get in. So we're really trying to value that person, even though you don't know that we're referring to you. We're taking your choices and we're honoring those choices from the moment that we meet you virtually in that application submission.
I think this is the point where I want to throw it to y'all, because I asked you to think about a question to ask each other. So I want to open the floor. Who has a question for another panelist that might open up discussion in a different way?
I have a question. So, and this is kind of just me thinking through all of this that we're talking about today and what high school counselors in particular do throughout the year with students, and definitely getting Stacey's thoughts, Lenny getting some of your thoughts because you work with high school students, and thinking about students who have a counselor where they're a little bit ambivalent about talking to that counselor about certain things that relate to identity, that relate to orientation, that relate to all of this. I think, you know, it's tricky because in working with teenagers every day, there's like always a group of students who are the first ones in my office who, you know, are ready to tell me their life story. And then there are students who I will not see if I don't pull them in and have a conversation with them. What do y'all think about counselors initiating these conversations or allowing these conversations to be student-led? Like, is the onus on students to bring this up to their counselors? Like, what has that looked like for y'all as high school counselors?
It's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, my experience is so limited to my experience, and I am, I'm in a very progressive school where I feel like the kids are really able to be themselves from day one, and we, so there, it's almost always a student-led conversation, in my, just because that's how that goes. But I will say that as a counselor, I try to do a couple of things to make sure that kids know that, you know, I'm a safe person to be around. And so from the way I decorate my office to some of the things I say in group sessions. So for instance, we talk about, I talk about LGBTQ, you know, like what the LGBTQ policies and culture are like at schools with straight kids, with kids I know are straight. And sometimes they'll say, well, why are we talking about that? You know, like, and I'll say, well, you know, don't you feel like, I mean, we're a place, you know, my school is a place where we, I think, go out of our way to work hard to create a culture where everyone feels included and welcome. And if that's something that's important to you moving forward, then you need to know that a college is treating students well who, not just who are in your identity group, but who are in all different identity groups. Don't you want to know how a school treats its Black kids and its international kids and its undocumented kids and its LGBTQ kids, even if you aren't any one of those things? And so I think that's a conversation that counselors can have. But as far as students go, and like trying to figure out whether students, like if a student is trying to figure out whether their counselor is a safe person, that's really hard. One thing that I would start by asking, because it's different in different places and depending on the role of the person who's doing the college counseling, is I would ask right away, do you have confidentiality? Is that part of our relationship? Because teachers don't generally, and counselors generally do, but depending on the counselor's background and training, they might not. And so I think that's one place to start as well. What about you, Lenny?
I also realized I never introduced myself.
Oh yeah, you should.
For all the fans at home, my name is Lenny Yesner Foreman, and I'm the Director of College Career and Future Planning at City Polytechnic High School in Brooklyn, New York, which is a career and technical education school. I've only been there 3 months, and before that I was the Director of College Transfer Services, Transfer Office at Bard High School Early College Queens in New York City. So my context is really urban. My context is New York, though I have been a counselor in the Midwest as well. And my context is really being a genderqueer out counselor. So my pronouns are they, them, theirs, identify as trans and non-binary. And that's a really unique position. So I think in some ways, like very few kids are going to have an out counselor. Very few. And so that's, I think, what young people need to think about, and this is what I think about as a person when I'm identifying whether or not another person is a good person to talk to, is I like test the water. I'd say like, oh, this is interesting that now they're, the Oxford Dictionary is saying that they, them is an appropriate pronoun. What do you think about that? And then if the person's like, well, I don't understand why that's a thing, I wouldn't necessarily cut them out, right? But I might bring it up in a less charged way. So if I'm a young person, I'm gonna sort of go, what do you think about that? What do you think about that? Right? I might ask 1 or 2 questions, and then when I identify, now ideally the counselor's doing the work. I think it is the counselor's work, not necessarily to ask kids like, what's your sexuality and gender identity, but because the truth is how many of us, those of us who identify in the community, I was out in high school, I was in the closet in high school. I didn't even know the closet existed around me. So like, I just assume that every kid might be queer because I assume every person might be queer. And that's a very different framework than most people come from. So I think as a young person, it's testing the waters in low stakes way. But it should be for the counselors who might be watching this later, it is on you, my dears. It is on you to be public, to be visible, to talk about it in your presentations, to share your pronouns, to talk about if you are a straight or heterosexual identified or cisgender person, to talk about that. The onus is on you, because then the young people will understand that you get it. And you don't know, the benefit to that will be so giant and so huge in young people's lives. You may never know what that benefit was until many years later. I think about what benefit I might have had if I always joke that I'm trying to be the genderqueer guidance counselor I never had. So we are rolling up on time. So we got about 9 minutes left. So maybe we got one more question from our panelists to our panelists.
I had a question that I wanted to throw to Justin. So, we talked a little bit about how to find the college, how to think about the application. How do you thrive in college? How do you flourish? So, do you have some advice on, in those first few weeks, in that first semester, are there some things that you can do to set yourself up for success over the course of your 2 years or 4 years, whatever your time is at that institution, to really, just do it well?
Yeah, there are a lot of things that you can do. And I think it really depends on where you are once you enter into the university, right? Not everybody's going to have the same lived experiences up to that point and not going to need the same student services, student departments, right? And so, but I think one of the biggest things is if your institution has orientation, going through an orientation and talking to the peer advisors, the orientation leaders, and kind of, like we talked about earlier, kind of filtering some of the questions that you may have around the university culture, or if they know somebody that you can connect with in order to be able to know all the different things. I know one of the biggest things for me as a gay first generation college student was, like, I knew I needed the counseling center, but I didn't know if that was something that would get out into the university or something like that. I didn't want anybody to think I was crazy. It was just I had a lot of stuff that I was dealing with at home, right? And so the counseling center, the health center, because I know one of the biggest things was even now, like I'm very, very concerned about STD, right, in my sexual life. And so that was not a conversation I could have with my parents or my guardians or whatever. And so can the health center help me with that, right? And so being able to kind of look at all the other things around the university and kind of thinking about what do I need to survive and what do I need to grow? Because I think that's a big point that you made out as well too, is like, what do I need to help me get to that next step in life, that, you know, to my freshman year to my sophomore year, from my sophomore year through graduation, and then post, because not a lot of people talk about what it's like to be a first generation, you know, gay black male from the South who decides to move to Miami. Like that's a big, you know, culture shock, right? And so, you know, it's trying to find a network, whether it's through social media, whether it is through, you know, kind of some of the informal channels through social media, some of the formal. I know like the Human Rights Campaign, they even have scholarships for LGBT students, and that was not something that I knew, you know, until I became, you know, until I came out and started being an advocate and ally for students who may be going through a similar process as I was. And so you just want to make sure that you're asking questions. And of course, no question is a dumb question. You're not going to know unless you ask somebody, right? And so, of course, a lot of students are trying to figure out, hey, what is it? Who can I go to, especially if they aren't out? Who can I go to? So this won't necessarily be a big thing in regard or blow out of proportion, or I'm outed and I feel like my life is, you know, going down the drain. But who can help me get to that next step? And I may not be ready for, you know, to go to a pride event on campus, but I'm ready to start telling my story, right? And so who are those people? Who are those departments? What are different, like I said, even I talked about earlier about the Miami Beach Pride. Like, no, maybe I saw somebody that's in my class and I saw them on one of the recruitment materials. I know it's one of the things that I do as an admissions counselor. All my presentations have some form of LGBT student in the presentations, whether it's a picture of a pride event or talking about the LGBT center on campus, or just talking about my lived experience as an LGBT college student. And so just kind of making sure that they know, like, hey, I heard this, you know, so this may mean that FIU or Justin may know a little more about some of the things that I'm concerned about. And so just being, you know, listening, and then of course doing your own due diligence, that's gonna be really important. You talked about, you know, start at a website. And so does the university have a website? You know, are there resources on that website, you know, in regards to some of the things that I may be struggling with? And if not, going to those student departments on campus and saying, hey, you know, I need to talk to someone, or finding that champion, a mentor, somebody. You're going to always have different receptions. Now, I think that was something that was different from when I was in college. And I think I'm the youngest person on the panel, but when I was in college, we didn't have like pride centers like that. That wasn't a big thing. And I went to a large public institution. And so now there are pride centers for students. There are individuals that are dedicated to doing the work for you as an ally and an advocate, right? And so going to those individuals and saying, hey, this is what I need to get by my freshman year, to matriculate through graduation and post college life as well too. And so just having those conversations, putting yourself in a brave space, because I know safe spaces are, you know, where you can go and be yourself, but putting yourself in a brave space sometimes so you can get that growth that you need in order to then get the help that you need as well.
Thank you, Justin. I wanted to just say, this is something we haven't talked about before, right? We're talking about like students of the LGBT community. In my life, the best supports to me have been other LGBTQ folks. And I mean, being real, it's people I've dated or people I've dated and known through dating, right? And I'm thinking about my students who have gone to colleges and not really thought about what romantic and dating life might be like for them when they get to college. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that's a question that might be taboo for students to be thinking about with their counselors. But, you know, it's important to think about, like, what are my relationships? What my relationships look like at the college that I'm going to. And that's not to say to rule out certain schools, because, you know, if I had thought about it as a queer kid I went from Queens to Iowa, right? If I had really thought about it, I might not have gone, but I found community there, right? And I think that there will be community wherever you go, but it will be a different kind of community. And based on your intersectional identities, really thinking about how you're going to connect to other folks is really, really important. So, we're going to close out. We don't have a chat feature, but I wanted to just shout out several resources and to thank our panelists. So the first resource is the Trevor Project. first and foremost, when we're talking about safety, this is really, really tough times, y'all. And we want young people to know that there are resources available. So if you just Google the Trevor Project, there are confidential chats, confidential phone calls, and support 24/7 if you're experiencing any sort of crisis or need for support, especially if you are cooped up with your family and that is really troubling for your identity, and know that you are not alone in that. The second one I want to shout out is the Campus Pride Index, which I know we didn't talk about a lot today, but is an incredible resource, has resources. They have a great Instagram account that I just started following, which is Campus Pride on Instagram. They have a Trans Pride Clearinghouse that talks about resources for trans students specifically. They've done a lot of research there, as well as information for queer and trans students of color. So it is incredible. So that's just Campus Pride Index. And you can literally research whether or not FIU and Pomona and other institutions are as queer and LGBTQ friendly as they'd like to think they are. And they talk a lot about policy. I also want to shout out the Point LGBTQ Scholarship, which is an amazing scholarship. My alarm is going off saying it's 3:45. And then we'll try to share some general resources around LGBTQ issues in the when we post this video. But one other resource I want to shout out is the College Essay Guy, who a lot of us know, has posted some resources about how to think about coming out in your college essay should you choose to do so. And he has sample essays, which I think is really, really helpful. And then the last resource is something that Alicia shared with us, which is #us_hate. So #USVHate, which is an initiative coming up over the next couple of months in 2020, where students can showcase their learnings around supporting anti-bias viewpoints and sort of mess up folks who are trying to mess with others. So that's #USVHate.
Hey,
So
Lenny,
that's
this is Dan
panelists.
from
We're going to
Stripe.
move. Thank you. Thanks, DriveScan.
No, sorry. I didn't make this clear at the beginning. We don't have a chat function, but we do have a Q&A button. So anyone in the audience who is participating can see this Q&A button. If you want to ask a question, you can submit those. You can submit them anonymously as well. So if you'd like to do that, we don't have another session immediately following this one, so we have a few more minutes if we'd like to accept any questions. So.
Oh yeah, we'd love to accept questions. I just figured the moderator.
While we're waiting to see if anyone is doing that, I'd also just like to shout out hrc.org. That's another good resource. And in their search box within their website, if you type scholarship database, a huge database of scholarships specifically for LGBTQ students come up, and it's really extensive. I don't think it's exhaustive, but I think it's the most comprehensive one I've seen. And they have other resources as well.
Hey, Dan, do you know if I can share?
Yeah, you can share a screen if you'd like.
No, yes, I want to share my screen. I wanted to share some resources, some links, but so we've got a question here. So are there any specific things that should be immediate red flags when looking at a college? It's a great question. What would you want to see and be like, bad looks?
Well, I've toured a lot of colleges, almost 250, and I always ask about whether there's a Pride Center or anything like that. I also ask about, are there faculty who are out? I ask about health services, and I would say that every once in a blue moon, I get someone who's very taken aback that I'm asking these questions and know about a pride, that's, and that's a huge red flag right there, big red flag. So I would say that, in general, the other thing that I would say is I do is when sometimes I look in the search bar of the website and I just type in the word gay and see what comes up. And it's really interesting because sometimes you get the LGBTQ Center, and sometimes you get articles from the newspaper about incidents that happened of, maybe a hate crime, or you get speakers who are coming to talk. So you can really kind of get a weird but illuminating sense of campus culture sometimes by doing something like that.
Yeah, and I just would like to add a piece to that, because coming from a religious high school and having a number of students who would like to continue to a four-year college or university that also has a religious affiliations, for students to not automatically discount religious institutions, because we have some partner schools that are amazing at honoring and affirming identities in all of the ways. And so that's something I would like for students to think about. And then the Campus Pride Index is a great, it's a great sort of complement to whatever search engines y'all are using anyway. So we use SCORE at my school. And so I really have students sort of cross-reference those lists. So if they're getting a certain list of schools from SCORE, then I'll have them enter those same schools into Campus Pride Index and see what comes up. And, you know, just sort of to get a full picture. And like Stacy said, you know, asking other people, other counselors, if they feel comfortable to ask alumni of your high school what their experiences have been on certain campuses. We're in the DMV, so there are schools that are very, very close geographically to us that are a little trickier for some students. And so we have honest conversations with alumni about what their experience is like on those campuses. So that's another piece to it.
Thank you. That was one of the questions that someone shared. So I would also say, like, Catholic is not Catholic is not Catholic is not Catholic, right? It means a lot of different things. So really never, ever shut something out wholesale. Like when people are like, oh, I would never, you know, I'm an LGBTQ student, I would never go to the South. There is such amazing queer community in the South.
Yeah.
Such amazing queer community in the South. So like, it's really about individual institutions and how they're handling it. That's where that self-advocacy of being like, what are your policies around X? And that's a great way also to create that distance between yourself and being like, I am this person, which is a vulnerable. Again, I'm not saying don't be vulnerable. Be vulnerable as you feel comfortable. But if you don't want to be, you can say, what is your policy around X? And then that's a really general question. So a question we had was, could coming out in the personal statement ever increase or decrease your chance of admissions? Oh, Pomona, most selective high school. Can you please tell us?
I mean, short answer, no. I mean, I think I would go with Stacy's initial comment that, you know, there is something that we look at called quality of writing. And so you can write a coming out essay badly, and by that mean don't use proper English, write it really terribly. It's 200 words. I'd rather see 500. I mean, I do think that your story is really important, but I'm also looking for lots of things in an essay. And so in so many ways, I want to honor that, but does it give you like an extra little check? No.
Thank you. We had a question about supporting trans athletes looking into college. I have some thoughts on this, but I'm to go to you, Adam, again, because you mentioned that you do have trans athletes on your campus. And what advice do you have for trans athletes looking into college?
Have frank, to the extent you are comfortable, have frank conversations about this with the coach. If you are officially being recruited in D1 or D2, it looks a little different because of the way the clearinghouse works. But in D3, you still can do official visits. You still can be a recruited athlete in a formal sense, but don't go too far down the road of being recruited, quote unquote, and without having that conversation about what are the team policies? What are the department policies? How does the college think about this? At Pomona, our healthcare student healthcare plan covers transitioning services up to a certain amount. Some student healthcare plans don't cover this at all. Hormone therapy, PEP, PrEP, all those sorts of things as well, just because you do want to have a social life and think about that. And the idea that you are going to be an athlete at many institutions, you're also going to be looked at as more than just an athlete. You are a student. You are a member of this community, that community. Look at integration. How can you integrate into other parts of the community rather than just being with the team all the time? Because ideally, you don't want to be just with the team all the time. You want to have lots of circles of friends.
These are great questions, y'all. And then the last piece was, and then we'll close out, was to repeat the name of this resource for scholarships. So Stacy mentioned HRC. So if you Google HRC and like scholarships.
Right. And Point Foundation is one of the scholarships that Lenny mentioned, and it's on that website. So Human Rights Campaign, I think, is what HRC stands for.
And
so hrc.org.
Foundation scholarship essays. And do you have any quick advice for anyone who's applying to that scholarship? It is a highly selective scholarship.
Yeah, I would say my advice for the best scholarship essays, there are a couple of things. The essays, they're short essays and activities to list. And both of those things are incredibly important. And what you really want to do is show the committee your commitment to making the world better for LGBTQ people. And also, so we want to see the depths of your involvement in activities. And the biggest thing I think is to show how the adversity that you have faced, whatever that adversity is, has transformed you and has led you to want to help others. And that is the big thing. Can you take, I think it's a definition of resilience, right? Can you take adversity and put that into something that is going to make the world more beautiful and better? So show us that.
Second that.
Okay, we're going to close out. I want to just ask our panelists to share one, I'm putting you all on the spot, oh dear. Share one LGBTQ icon that you really respect.
I'll start.
I got this, I can do it.
Audre Lorde. And so much so that was like number 2 on my list of baby girl names. We went with Maya for Maya Angelou, but Audre was number 2, very close second. So definitely Audre Lorde.
As like a middle name, I'm just saying.
That's a good one. Mine would be Bayard Rustin. If you don't know who he is, he was the brilliant mastermind organizer behind Martin Luther King. And so he's somebody that I really look up to and wish I would have met. But unfortunately that won't happen. But that's my icon.
Yeah, Bayard is a really good one. I'm going to go with Harvey Milk. I mean, I was like a politics, diplomacy, ambassador kind of guy in college, and I just loved Harvey Milk. I also have to put in a plug for Madonna just because I literally listen to her music all the time. Give a shout out to the entertainers out there. There's a lot of people who support the community.
I'm going to, you guys have great ones, and I admire all those people. I am going to go with Karamo Brown, who is one of the Fab Five on Queer Eye, if you've ever watched that. I love him. I think he is so smart and compassionate and thoughtful. He makes me cry every time he opens his mouth. And I got to read about him and learn that I was like, he's a therapist. Like there's no way he's so smart without some real training there, And it turns out, yep, he was a social worker for 10 years. That man knows what he's doing. And I really admire him.
Okay, then I'm going to finish with mine, who's Kate Bornstein, who is a famous, infamous theater trans activist who wrote books and has also amazing resources. If you Google Kate Bornstein and sounds weird, but if you Google Kate Bornstein and suicide, she has a book on 101 things to do other than killing yourself, which sounds really intense, but I think is a powerful resources for young people who may be struggling right now. And she has my favorite phrase, and she says, "You can do anything you want to stay alive." This is my spouse who's mopping right now. I had the background so that I could have some. My spouse is also my other favorite queer person. But you can do anything you want to stay alive as long as you don't hurt somebody else. And I think that's something to live by. She gives you a little get out of hell free cards to say you can do anything you want as long as you don't hurt somebody else. So with that, thanks y'all. Appreciate you. Thank you for your questions. And hopefully, I think that we'll share resources afterwards, but you can Google all of our names and find our contact information.
Yeah.
All right, great.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I just want to close with a couple of housekeeping notes. Thanks so much for participating. Be sure to check out strivescan.com/virtual. We're adding a whole number. There are 96 sessions that are happening next week, and we're adding 240 for the next 3 weeks that are coming soon. As soon as you close this window, you'll be directed to a very quick survey. There's just a couple of questions, and we'd love a little bit of feedback on your experience. Thank you so much to our panelists and to the Accept group for putting this session together and for creating this great opportunity.
Thank you, Brandy.
Thanks, everyone. We appreciate it so much. You guys did an awesome job.
Stay queer, stay cute, stay healthy, your face.
Love it.
Have a great
like
day.
I was. Bye.
Have a good one, everybody.